convening those other public bodies, bringing them to the table, that's the first part. Getting them to put their hands in their own budgets and their own pockets, that's something else.
It's not going to be a talking shop, it's actually going to do something.
The obvious big value is they've gone from costing the taxpayer to putting money in. We're going into areas that we've never gone before. There is a wave of change coming to every public service, to every private sector business, to every one of us. Policing cannot be behind that curve because criminals won't be. Why are we paying people to move on, young people, when we should be saying, just go there, kids, have a great time there.
So Dan, it's always great to see you and everything, but why are we actually here with our fantastic
with our prison-friendly mugs?
Yes.
So the reason why we've come here is this is Thorn Cross Prison. This is a great example of where Timpsons, the household name, especially Big Cheshire
I know Timpson.
family, yeah, they've put in this training facility. They've got a factory next door, all about giving offenders a second chance, giving them a skill. They do it here. It's going on next door.
Well, we're sitting in a training centre. Will we get a chance to go and have a look at the factory as well?
We certainly will. You can basically see all the different stations where you've got all these shoe soles basically. Yeah. Well, you can sort of see, look, this is like, 10 Timpson shops basically. This is real work. For some of these lads, this is the first time they've ever done it. They're going to leave with skills, but having done this. So imagine when they go into a shop, they're already set up. For me, this is almost the perfect business. But there are others that would be perfect. They just haven't quite explored it. So.
Let me ask you a bit more about your ex-offenders thing and that event that you did at our place.
Yeah. The reason we're here is that we need our prisons, our probation services to do much more of this.
Yeah.
And it's a great example of where, someone's got it, thought about it, put money into it, built a great thing. It's worked with their organisation. It's took them from strength to strength. And it's a reminder that you can do it. I think some people just think this is all talk. Like, this has been done before. It can be done in a bigger and better way.
Yeah.
And I'm sure we will.
One of the things I was kind of interested in is that we hosted that event for you for talking about how to deal with ex-offenders or to get back into work and thing. And obviously the biggest question is, well, what happened after that night? There was a lot of actually enthusiasm in the room, really, from people, from businesses.
Yeah.
Wanted to get involved, help people. So where are we now?
I mean, yeah, you're right. It was quite a night, that. And actually it was a proper, uplifting moment, really, because when you put an event on like that, you are hoping that the people who say, we care about this, it's important to us, you're hoping they're going to still turn up. So having 50 odd businesses in the room or organisations was a real confidence booster for the programme. Since then, we've sort of gone from strength to strength. So we first of all, we had Department of Work and Pensions completely got it.
Yeah.
So they were quite quick to tell us, we're going to put some funding into this. Probation were in the room on the night, so they were sort of semi there, and they've since confirmed that. So the biggest thing is that we've took my office, who were committed to it, with one pot of funding, and we've tripled it by bringing the other public services together to say it matters to all of us. If we want to get ex-offenders into employment, if we want to reduce reoffending, it's not down to one public body to sort of do that. So convening those other public bodies, bringing them to the table, that's the first part. Getting them to put their hands in their own budgets and their own pockets, that's something else, especially with the public finances, the way that people are about it. So truthfully, the biggest thing that happened is we've got those partners on board with the funding that we need. And then the last few weeks, we've been working with those businesses, meeting them, understanding their appetite, and bringing this sort of advisory board together, which is going to facilitate this programme.
Yeah, the dreaded advisory board.
I must admit, we've sort of scratched our heads around what do we call this, but we have to have something that basically oversees what we're doing this morning.
Yeah, so you're depleted determined to fulfill that promise you said on a night that it's not going to be a talking shop, it's actually going to do something.
The commitment that I've already made to anybody in my team who's working on this and everybody who's involved in the project is we need to be going back. You might not know this. We need to be going back to your house next year and saying what we've done.
Yeah.
So that we've got the next cohort of businesses saying we need to be part of this. It's working.
Well, I think, all right, I'll say like on the camera here now, you're welcome to come back next year to see how it goes.
Good. That's good.
But it will actually be another kind of time for us to do a check and see if the project is actually progressing. The guy who came on the stage, who obviously we won't name for confidentiality, but his story about the journey and how he got into crime, the amount of time he spent in prison, and his journey to get back into a thing. I mean, so that was like it sounds strange in that context, but it was inspirational.
Yeah.
The more you can get that sort of stuff out, and get people to understand. Well, why do these guys deserve it?
Yeah.
Because the thing is, like, they've broken the law, gone inside. There's a lot of thought about actually going inside these days is a bit too comfortable anyway, So why are these guys getting special treatment to get them back in when there's so many other people struggling to get into work?
Oh, it's a fair challenge. I've had that from people already. I think what we've got to remember is that, this is our county. This is our public purse. It's in all of our shared interests that when people commit crimes, yes, justice is brought about, but we have to accept that, when people have done their time, they've come to terms with what they've done, and when they say they're ready for work again, it's in our interest to get them back into work. Because the truth is, once you've got that criminal record, it's going to be so much easier for you to basically just re-offend. Because if you can't put food on the table, if you can't feed yourself because you haven't got a job, how are you going to survive? All too often you meet people who've got a history of repeat offending, and it's quite simplistic why that happens. What else is there? I did it, and I did time, but ultimately there was nowhere for me to go after I'd come out either. So, one of the reasons why we're doing it here today, Timpsons are an organisation. We're in their workshop training the next sort of generation of their sort of workers. They've got a business where it makes perfect sense for them. They've seen the light to some extent that this actually is a great thing. It's good for the individuals, it's good for the business. There's loads of businesses out there that are interested, but they don't have the sort of, appetite or the business model that maybe what Timpsons have got.
They put some resources behind it too, don't they? They don't just say, oh, well, you come out of, you've been in prison, that's great, would you like a job? They do actually interview people inside the thing, isn't it? Does that suggest that not everyone can be, sort of brought out, or is it a question that people need different needs, different things tailored to them?
Look, this is not a one size fits all. I know there are some people with the records that they've got that are not going to be able to go into this program. My hope is that we will move this program over the years into a space where, basically everybody can be given that second chance, because there is an industry, there is a business which can manage the risk associated with that person, or what they believe is the risk associated with that person. But that will take time. The first year has got to be the low-hanging fruit of the problem. People who are really ready for work, businesses that are ready to give them a chance, and we bring those two together. The bit that is different with what we're doing and say what Timpsons has done, Timpsons accepted that they were going to put all the infrastructure in place, all that cost, all that HR understanding and management and supervision, all the rest of it. Loads of businesses can't do that. So what we're doing through this program is that we're having 3 full-time caseworkers in our first year. So that means that the ex-offender and the business sort of get the support, the holding of hands for 12 months. And actually when you meet businesses who are interested, when you tell them and will support you, not financially per se, but just in that you can pick up the phone, you can say, I don't think this is working, or equally, this is working brilliant. That caseworker that will help your organisation through difficult issues, that's the critical part that they often say. Without that, you know, I just wouldn't consider it. The first 100 people that go through the programme will have 12 months of caseworker support.
Right.
And what we'll have to do, quite simply, Phil, is we'll have to, if we want to, there's 1,100 people that we think are ready for this. We will have to scale up our 3 caseworkers with time, but we'll do it on a pilot basis. You know, we're starting now, we find out what works well, you know, then we scale up bit by bit, as opposed to, which I think the public has sort of see through, like these big bang announcements quite often, and the infrastructure might take years to get into place.
Yeah.
And so no one feels it for ages. We've got organisations that are on this programme that are going to provide great careers for people with engineering skills. My background's engineering. So, you know, and I know that this is what Cheshire does really well. We've got pharmaceutical companies all over the place. We've got advanced manufacturers. We've got car factories. You know, we are a bedrock of really advanced manufacturing. And it's only natural that we start talking about how do we get ex-offenders into some of those industries, because those are the industries of which our economy is built on. You know, we've got an organisation, for instance, that are going to train people on how to do the overhead electrification work. You know, that is real work that needs to be done. Those are proper salaries. That is not some sort of job that you can drop into for 5 minutes and say, I'm getting out of this, because you're going to be paid really well. You're going to see, when you start to work that sort of career and you get the pay from it, criminal history is going to feel like a really stupid thing to have ever considered.
Yeah.
You know, because you're going to be going on holiday. You're going to be able to buy things that you want. We had one guy on that night who said, for the first time in his life, he'd bought his mum dinner at the age of 40.
Yeah.
You could see he was like welling up with emotion. But you know, those are the things that will happen when you go into the world of work, because you'll have the freedom to do that.
I mean, I've been involved in things like from my time at the university where we've given grants to people and communities to teach them how to make media, basically.
Yeah.
And they do fantastic work. You develop the talent. It brings about community cohesion and all that kind of thing, so long as the funding is there.
Yeah.
And as soon as the funding stops, it all falls away.
Yeah.
So what's the thinking now, or what's the promise now that once you get started, this will actually continue?
But I haven't done this for 1 year. You know, I've got 3 years of my term left. I want us to scale this up year on year. Whether, you know, if I'm elected again, it'll be because people believe I've done what I promised I was going to be, or otherwise. Now, if in 3 years' time we haven't scaled this up and we're proving the difference this is making, then people have every right to say he didn't deliver on what he promised.
So how are you going to prove it?
So first year 100, second year probably double that, third year 500. You know, that's the direction of travel that I want us to go in, and be able to show people very clearly these are individuals who have, you know, maybe been in and out over and over and over again, or have been in and out of probation service for years.
But that's the proof of growing the bureaucracy. What's the proof that it's actually working? You know.
Well, look, it'll be real life evidence of people talking, like what we had on the night. People talking to an audience. This is what my life was like before this programme. This is what my life is like after the programme. In the end, if this works, we should see this in our public services costs as well. You know, because I should be able to say very clearly that we've reduced reoffending, and therefore we are not dealing with, you know, Mr. X, Mr. Y, Mrs. X, Mrs. Y. We're not dealing with them as often as we used to, if ever. You know, and I think that is the reality of this role. You are able to call on the constabulary to support you in that data. You're able to call on the courts to help you in that. So we will have to pull on other public services who maybe have a repeat history with individuals, and for them to say, yeah, it's fell completely off a cliff compared to what it used to be. It's working. But we've also brought in the University of Chester as well. So they're going to be doing all the data analysis. They're going to be basically compiling that evidence base. Because at the end, this will be a decisions taken on data. This is how much money we've put in. This is what we think we've saved. Does that play out? You know, that will have to be part of that decision.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? It will be data driven for those beastly people in the Treasury in the end, because they're the ones who come back and say, so how will you, I presume there's data already around about how much it costs to keep people in prison.
Yeah.
So therefore, you've got one set of metrics to work on. If this guy doesn't, or this one doesn't come back in,
Yeah.
we're going to save that. But then is there a value to be measured in what they contribute to the community and things like that?
I mean, the obvious big value is they've gone from costing the taxpayer to putting money in.
Yeah.
You know, let's be frank about this. We want people to not just spend all their life volunteering and living on benefits, but they're no longer costing us 50-odd thousand a year in prison. We want them no longer costing 50-odd thousand pound a year in prison, and we want them putting in through PAYE, through NI, like everybody else does. Frankly, I don't think anybody in the world of you know, law and order, criminal justice, community safety, you can't arrest your way to a safe society.
Yeah.
You know, those prevention services are vital. I made this big point in the election period about prevention focus. We've got more. We've already put some funding into youth services, but it's not enough. We've got to go way further. You know, we've got to get kids off the phones. We've got to put them into other areas that, you know, play more. Frankly, you know, have better relationships with each other. And there's loads of evidence showing about the consequences of that. And you know, we're seeing, you know, serious violence increasing. You know, so we've got to in many cases go back to some basics in this space, but that also will take time, and I'm up for that. You know, we've sort of put 200,000 into what we call the SWAP scheme, which is overwhelmingly going to youth service. We've just announced.
So what does SWAP stand for?
So SWAP is ultimately about swapping criminal activity and the proceeds of it, the money that comes from it, for giving back to the community, to community good. So yeah, seizing the assets of a known drug dealer in the area. Frankly, some of it goes to government, some of it comes back to Cheshire, and then we use that money and we put on youth services somewhere. So communities that are affected by crime actually get some of that money back. If you think about some of the best sort of competitions and teams, it's not all plain sailing. It should be, you know, I think this, well, I think this, you know, and actually you find that sort of middle ground where you've actually sort of crafted a really good idea. I think that is what this job should be. It should not be plain sailing. I don't think it's good for a police and crime commissioner to have a chief constable who just says yes to everything. And I don't think it's good for a chief constable to have a police and crime commissioner that says yes to everything. I think that is the right thing by the public. And I'd say that we've got that. And Mark's done a great job with the constabulary. You know, the HMIC report is solid. You know, one of the best forces in the country. You know, at the scrutiny meeting this morning where we're talking about where we are on league tables, we're often in the top 5, often. And he's done a great job at turning that around. But moving forward, you know, we're thinking about, that's why we've launched the Police and Crime Plan. It's much more about listening to the public. Yes, reducing crime, but also modernising. Because there is a wave of change coming to every public service, to every private sector business, to every one of us. Policing cannot be behind that curve, because criminals won't be.
It's interesting because, you know, you get to a certain age, don't you, look back on things. And I remember that crime prevention was always more upfront when I was growing up than it seems to be these days, you know. Because there does seem to be much more of a focus on the actual hard policing. I mean, I might just be misinterpreting that, but it's like, so it's that, I mean, so is it kind of, are the operational side of the police supporting this as much as you would like?
That's a good question. I mean, ideally, people in policing would just say, this is the best thing that we've never done and we should just do it. But I'm not naive as to expect that. You know, I think bringing about organisational change, it's never easy. You know, I've been part of it, you know, and, you know, my professional background, I think about the times we've had new people who've come in as an organisation and they want to, you know, turn everything upside down overnight. I think what I've been really clear is, though, that we will do, like we're doing on this programme and others, you know, my engineering background is we test. You know, we pilot, we test, we iterate, we make changes, then we test again, and you grow in a really sort of organic way. what we're not going to be doing is taking millions out of services overnight and then just throwing it into other services overnight. That's not sustainable. You know, you need to scale up organisations. So I think about all the little youth services that I've been visiting across the county. You know, they would love it if, sure enough, Police and Crime Commissioner walks in and says, "I'm going to give you £100,000 next year. Good luck." Equally, they wouldn't be able to spend £100,000 overnight. So, you know, I think what we need to do is we need to be scaling up and doing more and more in communities. And the best example I can think of in the county that is big and it's very costly, but it's impressive, are the youth zones. You know, every town should have a service like that, frankly. Somewhere that young people can go, they can be with their mates, they can be off the streets where we keep hearing about antisocial behaviour as a consequence, but they're getting all of the soft skills, which you know, mobile phones are taken away from young people, spending too much time scrolling and actually, you know, are missing out on some of the best parts of growing up, which is sort of playing and...
We've given them the most powerful communication research tool known to man in their hand. The first thing you want to do is take it off them.
And I don't think that is the solution. So it's not like it's not all or nothing. You know, it is a bit less on that and a bit more with these. You know, a bit less scrolling on Instagram and a bit more playing some games or, you know, doing some sort of cooking classes that these clubs often have now, or just getting to have different skills. Because let's be honest, you're going to be fine on the technology. You are, because you've been born into, you know, I've benefited from it. But, you know, you need the other skills as well with life, which is about being able to communicate with humans face to face, because you are going to have a career at some point which will require that. So I do think it's a balance. It's not black and white. But, you know, I've seen some of the proceeds of the likes of Warrington Youth Zone and some of the other services in the county. There's just not enough kids getting that in their community, and that's what needs to be fixed.
Yeah,
you know, they'll have a much better quality childhood if they get a chance to have a bit more of that, and it works. You know, unfortunately, it was seen as a bit of a luxury that we couldn't afford anymore. But we've got to find a way to bring it back, because what I would say as being a councillor before, you know, loads of decisions were about how do we balance the budget tomorrow. And in actual fact, before you realise you've actually got a problem coming down the track, because prevention, you know, being cut piles onto response or delivery or whatever that other service might be. And the prevention cuts are often being the easiest that through austerity have been made. We're up to our eyeballs in response funding and we're putting more and more and more money into that. NHS is a great example. You know, NHS is getting loads more funding to deal with the consequences of prevention failing in many cases.
What's the obligation on the ex-offender in the scheme, you know?
I mean, look, probation will be the individuals who determine whether that person is ready for work or not. So make no mistake about it, if the probation officer is saying this person is gaming the system, this person is in that, this person is not ready for work, they simply will not get the opportunities. You know, that probation officer is an important cog in this machine. So they will be making those assessments. And those first 100, I've no doubt, will be people who are keen as mustard to get into work and have got some key skills from previous education that they've had. But that'll be the big difference between people thinking they can game the system and get away with it. No, the probation officer will see through right through that, because these are people who understand, you know, criminals, people who've got a history of repeat offending. And this programme will not be access to all. This will be, when you're ready, you can go on the programme.
But what skills have you got to actually sort of keep an eye on a chief constable who's been a copper for perhaps 25 years now against Bristol?
I think you have to come into this accepting that it's a different job to any other job that you've done. So I've been an engineer and I've loved that, but it's very different. I've been a counsellor. There's definitely similarities there. You know, as a counsellor, you're scrutinising decision making all the time. You're understanding officers of local authorities who are good and are getting on with stuff, and some others who are maybe not going far enough or doing as you'd hope. So, you know, I have that experience. Ultimately, you also have a team around you. You know, you've got an office that ultimately is resourced to support you in doing that, because your job is to be the public's representative. You couldn't just have this and then the public don't have a properly equipped representative, because the whole thing would fall on its face. But the other thing that is important about the job is that you, as the Police and Crime Commissioner, can go into areas that, frankly, a Chief Constable won't go, can't go. So I chair the Criminal Justice Board for Cheshire. You know, it would be really odd if that was chaired by a Chief Constable. The enforcer of the law.
I'd be more efficient.
Well, people might start to worry about the liberties if that was the case. You know.
Are they not now?
You know, the enforcer of the law is a very different role to somebody who's the representative of the public, all the public.
Mm.
So I think there are some important differences between the role. The biggest difference would be is that PCCs do an awful lot in crime prevention, whereas the old authority was more just very clearly holding the constabulary to account for the work the constabulary was doing, which was not the same support services that PCCs sort of fund.
So do you, as PCC, you have a panel instead of an authority?
Yeah. So I scrutinise the Chief Constable, and I have a panel of counsellors that scrutinise me. All of these checks and balances.
Yeah. One year in.
Yeah.
What do you think? How do you think you've been doing?
I'm definitely making a difference, and I know that because we're going into areas that we've never gone before. So yeah, we're doing an ex-offenders program. Great. You know, I've mentioned the swap fund. We've increased that significantly. You know, we are really embracing modernisation. You know, we've just had £300,000 to put an AI tool into one of the units that we have, which is focused around stalking. So we're doing stuff that we've never done before as a consequence of me coming in as commissioner and saying, these are the things that I promised the public, and this is what we've got to crack on with.
Yeah.
You know, talking about that youth services focus, that is, you know, if we can put, you know, millions of pounds a year into youth services in this county, that will have a massive impact in communities, in making communities safer, in giving young people opportunities that have not previously had. And I know that the world of policing will be a beneficiary of that. So, you know, we are doing things differently. And then in the really practical sense, you know, we're putting an extra 48 officers into neighbourhoods. The government came in and said it wants more neighbourhood policing. I'm pleased about that. You know, that is absolutely needed. It's going to give us something like an extra 20% in the neighbourhoods. So by this time next year, an extra 20% neighbourhood officers doing the sort of Bobby on the beat stuff. People do want to see visible policing in their area to reassure them that there is that presence, and we're doing it. You know, so it's heavy. You know, this is a big job. You know, you don't come into this lightly, but I'm enjoying it.
What about things like, I know something else you started is the citizenship assembly, assemblies. So how was that?
Look, I'm the first PCC that's done a citizens' assembly. It's a bit of a tongue twister.
Very brave thing to do.
And it's quite interesting. You get all these people in a room. We did the first one in Crewe in Nantwich. You get all these people in a room. And truthfully, I've gone into so many rooms with members of the public, as a councillor in particular. And you sort of know the regulars that come to consultation events and whatnot. And that's great. But you need to talk to everybody. You need to be able to talk to what is representative of everybody. So you walk into a room with this assembly and you realise there is faces that are all different ages, different ethnicities. You've got people who have no trust in policing, which is an important group to talk to. People who have massive trust in policing. We had like one little example was that they were all asked on all tables in this event were asked, you know, what's one thing you've got in common? One table came up with, we've all committed a crime. So it's like, you know, but it's a really honest environment where people get shown what's happening in the world of policing today. They can use that to sort of challenge against what they think is wrong with policing. At the end of it, sort of 5 days in, you're saying what we think are the priorities in our area. Mm. You know, what if there was money, where would the money go? And what comes out really clear, which is really reassuring, People want modernisation. They do, and they want prevention services.
Yeah.
They don't want to have to deal with the reality of kids being moved on to where, what they actually want to be able to say is that, well, they're being taken to the youth club and they're embracing the youth club, and parents and grandparents wised up to that, saying, why are we paying people to move on young people when we should be saying, just go there, kids, have a great time there.
Is there anything come out of those meetings that have been a surprise to you? Oh.
There are some difficult things to digest. When you see, the last 12 months, child neglect up over 100% in Cheshire, that's not necessarily genuinely up. It's not. It's that the constabulary are taking it serious. Reporting is up. But that is sad. No one wants to see that. You think, God, what are we going wrong? How do we sort that out? Mm-hmm. So that was, going to one of the assemblies and basically hearing a room of people go, when that is said by a chief superintendent, because you can see people thinking, how's that happened? Understanding the realities of domestic abuse. Domestic abuse is all too often, every street has got it happening. It's the single largest crime type. 20% of policing time is now associated with domestic abuse and the related incidents of that. So it's, that is hard to get your head around.
Yeah, well, there'll be a lot of people who say, like, well, the police shouldn't be involved in that, but that's probably for another debate.
But you see, what bothers me in that scenario, though, is that, I've spoke to people who have been able to say to me, I remember when we phoned the police and they came and my dad was just told to go on a walk and then he came back into the house. Now, domestic abuse is not only, men as perpetrators, it overwhelmingly is, but we can't have people's lived experiences as children of sort of people in authority failing them like that, because that's just going to live with them forever. So the reason why I'm so pleased that policing, especially in Cheshire, we've got the highest charge rate in the country when it comes to domestic abuse. The reason why we're taking it seriously is because we understand that to not take it serious is to sort of kick the can down the road.
I made a cop show back in the day, and I remember doing all the research. And one of the things I used to always ask in casting for directors and actors is, what do you know about the police? And they would immediately turn around and say they're all. Right. I'd say, why you say, well, they are. I said, well, what's your direct experience? And the answer would be, well, I haven't had any.
Yeah.
I know a friend who has.
Yeah.
And I think it was like 95% of people tend to wander through life without really engaging, except for the classic things of being stopped for speeding or asking directions or whatever.
Sure.
So again, is this a kind of thing where part of the role is to try and get over to the people? Or actually, life is not that bad. Life is pretty safe. Most people are honest,
Yeah.
And so we're dealing with a minority.
Yeah. And look, there are some areas of the county where something happens overnight. For that community, it's world shattering, and it might not be very serious, but it's new to that community. And so, when those things happen, my office gets a load of correspondence about what's happened last night, and I'm confident, I've been challenged against that quite a lot, that when things go wrong, you have got a good constabulary in Cheshire. You've got a good police force that will come and help and support you through all of that. There's always room for improvement, like every service. We always have to find where we failed and use that as an example to do it better next time. That's part of my job, to sort of, use victims' voices and learn from that failure. But I accept, we have a good force in this county. We have broad people who are very safe. We are the safest area in the northwest of England, which is a good place to be. And I think broadly people, all the data shows that broadly people get that. The Citizens' Assembly's told us people broadly get that. But it's interesting when somebody has been failed by policing, because you're right, they haven't used them very often, and then they went to use it and it didn't go as they thought it would. that has a really big impact on that person's trust
Or
in
it doesn't go
policing.
as they've seen on telly.
Or it doesn't go as they've seen it on telly, of course. And there's always a bit, the police have always got to manage that as well. But, you know, that's why it is important that we learn from victims. You know, I had a really difficult conversation with a survivor of domestic abuse and stalking. And it's definitely one of those that sort of is locked in, because you hear something bad and then something bad and then something bad, and you think, yeah, that is a multitude of failure that should not have happened. And please say it's not the norm. It isn't the norm. But I want to have those conversations with people who've been failed, so that we're putting plans in place to make sure it doesn't happen again.
Well, Dan, it's been great, and thanks actually for getting me inside the prison without having to go through the courts.
No, my pleasure. Look, and Phil, thanks very much for this, because you've been really supportive of the programme so far. And as we go on with it, I'm sure you'll continue to be. And it's really down to so much the work that you've done that's actually brought this to where we are. So, you know, thanks goes to you as well, and thanks for this.
Thank you.